Welcome everybody to the first seminar of the season, and I would like to welcome our speaker today, Nidra. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Nidra will address the attitude of France toward Israel under the Sarkozy Presidency, as well as current anti-Semitism and other problems facing the Jewish community in France. Nidra studied history at the University of Wisconsin and has a Master of Liberal Arts from Johns Hopkins University. She has been a writer of fiction for most of her life, earned her living as a translator from French to English, and turned to journalism in recent years. I'm sure most of you read her articles either in Commentary, the Wall Street Journal, the National Post, or many other publications. So thank you once again for coming. And our format is as usual. We have around 20 minutes, half an hour introduction by Nidra, and then we have time for discussion. Okay.
So I guess I'm here to take on Jacques Attali. I suppose most of you have read his interview. First, I want to thank you for having me, and thank you for being here. It's beautiful to see so many intelligent faces. I will try to be up to the level. And also, if you can't hear me...
Don't judge the book by its cover.
Well, I'm the one who's going to be judged by the content, so... this question of anti-Semitism, because I'm more a writer than a journalist, when I get on one of these bones, I'm going to work on it until I find something new, a new way to approach it, and a new way to get out of the trap that's being set. And so, living in France, where I came in all innocence in 1972, and then find myself faced with serious problems of anti-Semitism, and then hearing people all the time saying France is now an anti-Semitic country, and when I wrote my first article published in Commentary about that, it's called Betrayed by Europe, I wrote about the impact of this discovery to the French ambassador to the United States at the time, Jean-David Levitte, who is now an advisor to Sarkozy, wrote a letter to Commentary and to say France is not an anti-Semitic country. More recently, you have Jacques Attali saying France is not an anti-Semitic country. I was at the President's Conference and he spoke in one of the panels, and the owner of someone named Lali, who I discovered afterwards is the owner of the Washington Post, introduced him, and she said, well, I talked to Daniel Ben-Simon about Jacques Attali, and he said, oh, Jacques Attali is a genius. Oh, you can't introduce him. I was happy. Well, Daniel Ben-Simon, it was around 2003, wrote an article about how France is not an anti-Semitic country. And everything that you could have claimed was anti-Semitic, he had a reason and a way to take it out. And he said nobody has gone to the hospital or, injured because of anti-Semitism. And I wrote to Haaretz and I said, what about Sébastien Salam? Murdered and murdered. And afterwards, Daniel Ben-Simon went and interviewed this Salam. So that's for the geniuses. Now for stupid me, the thing is that there's no anti-Semitic country. Well, you could say anything, You could say France is not a beautiful country. Or you could say France is a beautiful country. But anti-Semitism is the same thing. It's not a label. It's not what we call appellation d'origine contrôlée, merci. So I'm looking for other ways to talk about it, and this I will read. It's on the thing that you have. This is in the aftermath of the trial of the torturers, murderers of Ilan Halimi. The trial was held this year. The accusation of anti-Semitism is not an ideology, it's facts on the ground. Thousands of attacks against Jews since the fall of 2000. Anti-Semitism isn't a label that sticks. It's a situation in which Jews are left to the mercy of their enemies. Any pretext will do. Jews have money, poison the wells, kill the gods, colonize Palestinian land. When Jews act to defend themselves, it spikes renewed rage and hostility. So France is not an anti-Semitic country. Jacques Attali can say it. He has more books published than me. So what does that change? It changes nothing. So, and why even put it that way? And who needs anti-Semitism when you have Islamization and anti-Zionism? You can put the Nice. In January, during the Caslet operation, we had throughout Europe something that were called demonstrations. Sometimes they were called anti-war demonstrations. And what I call them was jihad incursions. They were unlike anything we had seen before. Do we have to listen to that? Is it? I can't see. You can just watch the pictures while I talk. Okay, so you see the kind of thing it was. I saw the beginning when they got together at Place de la République for the first one, early in January. There were, I think, 30,000 people. And the difference, you know, we had so-called peace marches also in 2003. I wrote about that, and I called it Peace March Verging on Pogrom. But this time, it went much further. And so they were all in keffiyeh. Almost everybody was Muslim. There'll be about 3 peace doves, you know, kind of there and practically scared to get in the crowd. They had raucous voices, blood-curdling voices. They stomped through the streets. And they were shouting, "Death to the Jews, death to Israel." It used to be a secret. It used to be that people would hear it and then say they didn't hear it. And this time it was out there. And then they were stomping through, you know, like soldiers. And then they would get to their end point, Place de l'Opéra, Place Vendôme, and then they would tear up the town, smash and bash and burn cars. And you would see in the media that there had been an anti-war march. We had, I think, 350 registered acts against Jews in January. We wrote about one of the most dramatic, Jonathan Guest. They went to hijack his car. When they saw he had a Kabbalistic pendant, they said, "Are you Jewish?" And they said, "Is that Hebrew?" He said, "Yes." "Are you Jewish?" He said, "Yes." And one of the 2 guys, both of course Muslim and with skinas, takes out a knife and he says, "I'm going to cut you till you bleed." And he starts cutting like this, cutting and cutting. The 4th cut, he starts profusely bleeding, and he found that afterwards it was a few millimeters from the carotid. He almost was killed. Then he was cut that out, and the guy kicked him in the face. And he went on television, on radio, Jewish radio, of course, to tell what had happened to him. He was terribly traumatized. Of all of these incidents that happened in January, there were virtually no arrests, no punishments, nothing. And this is for our President Sarkozy, when they did beat up the Hashomer Hatzair kids in 2003 during the so-called peace march. He came to the Hashomer Hatzair locale, and he promised them, and he has done this many times. He promises he will find them and they will be severely punished. It never happened. So it just, you know, it just goes back into the stream. Now things are quiet, but anytime that there's another reason, it can start again. So what we're finding in France, not specifically concerning the Jews, is the Islamization. There's a sort of tribalization going on now. Criminality is absolutely soaring out of control. And there are turf wars. The police and the firemen are ambushed. Now they shoot at them with guns, and the police don't shoot back. They are terrified of having, not I'll do a hoax, but a real. They're terrified they will kill a young Muslim and that the whole country will go up in flames. But I mean, it doesn't need that, because very often you get kids on either they're stolen a car or a motorcycle, and the police try to catch up with them, and they smash into a wall and get killed. That leads to several days of very serious rioting. I read a report today about a turf battle in a shopping center in Créteil, just outside the city limits. And this is another layer of insanity that is taking over in European countries, because they write about it as if somehow it's a normal situation. But they're telling about, well, apparently some boys from this place, from a housing project or something, and some from that place were arguing with each other. Then one threw a scooter at the other. Then they tore it apart and started to hit each other. And apparently it had to do with territory. Another time, apparently it was a dispute about going out with the girls. But it's this kind of, we're getting this kind of tribal society. And it's out of control on every level. It's out of control in the schools, out of control in the social services, out of control in the hospitals, out of control in the neighborhoods, into the middle of the city, not just outside the city. Burning cars in the city. I reported in Standpoint on an incident, burned 7 cars. The police, I tried to track down, the spokesperson at the courthouse is the only one allowed to talk about it. And she said to me, well, if they find out that it was arson, it's very unlikely they'll find out who did it, so they'll just drop the case. And again, she says that to me like it is perfectly normal. That's the situation. Now, these jihad operations, they were never reported. If you didn't go and see, you didn't know what was happening. They were reported all together. I came back from one, I couldn't get close. I was sometimes showing people around. Some people came to do a film from the Florida Security Council. And I took the women, and the men went and really got close to the thing. And the women, they hadn't had their lunch yet, and they kept saying, well, shall we stop in this cafe? And I said, oh, no, we don't go to that cafe because they might come down this way and we'll be stuck and we'll be able to get out. Right. And then I'm in my neighborhood at the bakery, and I see a neighbor, and he says to me, yes, I heard they had another demonstration today. They said, oh, sort of bon enfant, friendly sort of family kind of thing. I said, what? There were police cars all over the Place Vendôme. I sat, we did finally find a cafe. I sat in the cafe at Place Vendôme with all these chic people eating very expensive little things. And I'm looking out, and I'm going by jihadis, going by women in niqab and people with Palestinian flags as a cape over them. And there are police cars at Place Vendôme and sirens and all. And it was like a movie, because they were just oblivious to everything that was happening. Then we go from death to the Jews to death to one Jew. We can show the picture of Ilan Halimi. This is the picture of Ilan Halimi that was sent by email to the family less than 24 hours after he disappeared. Take a good look at that picture and think what it means that for 24 days the police handled this as a kidnapping for ransom. Actually, that is probably one of the most cruel, inhumane, barbaric blindfoldings in modern times. And he was kept that way for 24 days. A little hole for straw where they gave him some liquid nourishment. He was kept naked with a very thin bathroom on the floor in an unheated apartment in January. His mother begged the police to understand that it was anti-Semitic. They, you know how these kind of institutions can treat a woman the same way Jacques Attali talked about her in that interview? Oh, because she's distraught because her son is in this situation, so she's not thinking clearly. So they only dealt with the father and told only the father to deal with the kidnappers, and for 24 days it was the worst mess of a completely botched investigation, and he was tortured to death, little by little, in what I call a little homemade death camp. 3 years of investigation, 3 years of investigation, gag rule. Then the trial, juvenile court, because 2 of the 27 defendants were under 18 at the time. Didn't separate into 2 things, didn't do like in the United States, for a crime like this, try them as adults. Juvenile court, gag rule. But one Nouvel Observateur, left-wing magazine, published a blog every day. Very mediocre, little, low-level journalist, wrote a blog every day, so-called telling what was happening in court. And all of it was to help the defense, because their version that they wanted to put through was that the gang leader, Fofana, was anti-Semitic, evil, all you want. And all the others were sort of lost souls who just wandered into this thing. They stayed with this man 24 hours a day and kept him even when Fofana went to Ivory Coast, and they kept him. And the verdict very lenient. Jewish organizations and the family appealed to the Justice Minister, and the Justice Minister asked for an appeal, a new hearing. This caused an avalanche of Jew hatred in all the media. This is supposed to be a secular country. Why is a religious group telling the justice what to do? An avalanche, that's why I said, that's what anti-Semitism is. You do anything you want to one Jew, and if the Jews try to defend themselves, then you pour it on them. I had a long interview with the lawyer of another person who had been kidnapped by the same gang. Her name is Muriel Wakni-Melki. This man was kidnapped, and they tried to do the same thing, and he screamed, and the neighbors heard him and called the police. He had 97 blows to his head, and all that time shouting anti-Semitic insults. These are the same gang, the same people that did Ilan Halim. The defense lawyers of these murderers made them, their defendant, a cause célèbre. They had press conferences, they wrote articles. And who was the persecutor, who was the victim? The people who had tortured this young man to death. Then we can see Dieudonné's poster now. This was in the recent, I think it was legislative or regional elections. Anyway, this is this former comedian Dieudonné, who's made now his main thing is Jew hatred, and that's the poster. And you know, when there's election, every polling place, each party puts a poster. And there are many, 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 many polling places. In France, people go on foot, every little local school and so on. So this was passed all over the country. And this is the anti-Zionist party. What is the Sarkozy government doing about this that is different? Well, it is different. First of all, even with regard to Israel, Sarkozy is sincerely sympathetic to Israel. However, his idea of being a good friend to Israel is to come and say, you need a Palestinian state right away, we know the whole thing, living side by side and on other borders, like Jerusalem capital, what? And does he really believe that? It's hard to tell. What I can say is that things are moving and changing. I'll come to that in a second. It's hard to tell in France if they are really doing something about this encroachment of Islam, or is it window dressing? Right now there's a debate. Should they outlaw the niqab in public? First, the media rushed right in, right? The media rushed right in to say that there are only 200 women in France wearing niqab. Well, afterwards it comes out, well, it's 2,000. And who knows, it could be 20,000, because it can be like those jihad operations. If you don't see them, you don't know. They had a place they called the jungle in Calais, where illegal immigrants were gathered, trying by all means to get into England. And they supposedly cleaned it out recently. But did they clean it out, or did they just chase them away and then close their eyes as these people moved somewhere else into another part? The media are extremely, extremely negative about Sarkozy. They'll tell you that he controls the media. Well, if he controls the media, then it's a really bad control. They're not really able to deal with the social upheaval. I think that in all of Europe, Geert Wilders is probably the only political leader, we'll see what Manfred would say about that, the only political leader who's not tainted and who is proposing a very extreme reaction to an extreme problem. We don't have anyone like that in France. The Union for the Mediterranean was Sarkozy's baby. He announced it during the campaign in his foreign policy press conference. I was very disappointed to hear that at the time. It was supposed to be bringing together the North and the South, exchanges of all sorts. It's a bit the Arabia thing, if you're familiar with all of that. And then sort of connecting the Mediterranean South to the EU countries and all being happy together. The only problem is he insisted that Israel be included, and they can't really put one foot in front of the other. The big meeting that was supposed to be held was just canceled because several countries refused to, I think, I can't remember the ones, but in closing, I would like to bring in another element from the United States, because I think it's very helpful to understand what's going on in Europe, because it's starting to happen in the United States, or it's moving in the United States, and that is the Rivka Barry case. I don't know if you're familiar with it. A 17-year-old girl from a Muslim family from Sri Lanka, living in Ohio, ran away. She converted to Christianity, and she ran away from home after hiding her Christianity for several years. She said her father would kill her, or the people from the mosque. Her parents belonged to one of the most extreme mosques in the United States, the Newer Mosque. And she ran to Florida, and so she was in the custody of Florida law enforcement, and the case has been heard. There have been many, many hearings since this summer. And the issue was, is really a death penalty for apostates in Islam? The same way that you have the French media and those defense lawyers in Ilham Halimi case doing but more than their utmost to deny the dangers of Islam or the nature of Islam. In this case, you have the same thing. The local newspaper, the Orlando Sentinel, you would think that they were paid by the Noor Mosque, and in fact, they are sort of together with CAIR, C-A-I-R, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. And they have been pushing and pushing this 17-year-old girl who had the courage to run away. And all they want is for her to be sent back to Ohio. And they smear anybody who says that she would be in danger. So I went and I interviewed some people in Montpellier who are connected to the Planned Parenthood, but they're a separate unit. They provide shelter for young women who are running away from their families, young women or older women. And of course, they're Muslim running away from forced marriage or other oppression of this type, families that don't want them to be westernized and so on. Because France is so secular, they don't seem to have cases, though there are cases of conversion, but it's hard to find. So this, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, no questions asked. They take these girls to safe houses. And this is widespread in Europe. But in the United States of America, this girl is being sent back to Ohio, even though they found out that her parents are illegal immigrants who lied several times to the authorities. So to tell you that, you know, for years my friends in the United States were saying, get out of Europe, you know, it's like in the 30s and you see what's happening. But in the United States, this kind of pressure. I attended two events, the Free Speech Summit with her brothers in Florida this year, and a symposium in Nashville, an anti-jihad symposium. Both cases, Boca Raton, Florida, Nashville, Tennessee, the hotel canceled 1 week before the event on the grounds that they couldn't handle such a controversial issue, although they had been told what was going to be done and said and so on. So if they can put that kind of pressure in Nashville, Tennessee and Boca Raton, Florida, it indicates that we're dealing with something that is widespread and international and stumping for our leaders. One last thing that I want to say is that President Sarkozy, I wrote about this quite a while ago, and now it's coming out a bit more, that there's a lot of hostility, animosity between President Sarkozy and President Obama. President Obama has snubbed President Sarkozy particularly, but all European leaders. This wonderful understanding that was going to take place between Europe and the United States as soon as George W. Bush got out of the way hasn't happened. And the Obamania is sort of settling down in France. But President Sarkozy is taking positions, very strong positions on issues, very critical of President Obama on issues like Afghanistan, Iran, and I think that we'll see an increase in that. I'm going to take questions now, and I just want to say, any of you who speak French, I'm speaking at a dîner débat in Netanya on the 2nd of November. I can pass this information around while you're asking the questions, if any of you can.
Thank you very much. First is Nidra.
Would you like to give me your evaluation of the response of the French Jewish community?
Sometimes I used to find it very timid, and in my smarty way, I used to say, oh, the American Jews wouldn't do like you, you're too timid, you ask them nicely, please, could you not? Now that I see what's happening in the United States, I can see that. In order to have access to any political personality, they have to be so careful. And as soon as they do the least little thing, speaking out frankly about what's going on, they get criticized, set aside, pushed aside, and go back down.
I must say I have a different version. I see a great contrast to the British. They're the only ones in Europe.
Oh.
They're the only ones in Europe who've got guts. And if you take people like Pasquier and his predecessor, Kuckerman, they spoke up in a way that I wish all other Europeans and some Americans would follow.
Oh, we don't disagree. Okay. I'm talking sort of absolute way. What can we do? Because Pasquier is very good, very good. And he speaks up much more than Kuckerman. And precisely in this case, in the Adura case, what happened? He spoke up, he spoke up, he spoke up. They said, okay, we're going to have an independent commission. Well, it's not happening. And people like Valerie Hoffenberg and Jean-François Coupé, who do the Let's Be Friends things, they get up and ahead and all kinds of facilities and investments and so on. and like Pasquier, he stands his ground. But on the Ilan Harini thing, the French Jews and a lot of people like Anna Finkelkraut were even, they were more outspoken. Many more Jews were outspoken in that case.
Despite the Israeli Foreign Ministry trying to shut them up.
Yes. But what happened? There is going to be a new trial. And where is it going to be? Juvenile court, Val de Marne in the Banlieue. So again, what I want to say, maybe I didn't come across exactly, is that nowhere, any time can the facts of this case be exposed. It's under a gag rule, and people will tell you, well, I mean, they don't know what those people did to this young man. And this picture that you saw before, they were forced to take off the cover on the next.
Edward and then Caroline.
There's an Arab saying, my enemy is my friend. That's not a Jewish saying. And God help us if we need to have allies like Winders or Le Pen or any of these racist right-wingers. I think we should be very careful who we choose as our allies in this. What we need is a Emile Zola of today, not, I don't know if there is one on the horizon, but I think we have to be very careful
Liberals are
not
not in the
to...
same category as them.
No, it has nothing to do with Le Pen. He has specifically avoided
Not
any...
racist. Maybe
He is never racist.
It's absurd to put Wilders next to Le Pen. Absolutely absurd. What does Wilders say certain things which I think are over the top and which will hamper him in his future political career. I've also mentioned that to him. The issue, Wilders today is leading according to some polls, the largest party in the Netherlands, which means that normally the Queen, if he gets 30 seats and the Christian Democrats go down to 26, who are today the largest party, normally the Queen should charge him to get a government. This is not going to happen because he cannot get a government together. And even if he gets into a government, he has all these marginal statements which disqualify many of his things. For instance, he said, we want to have a headscarf tax of €1,000. Well, that of course is something you cannot do. We Jews are against it because some of our women cover our heads. So, you know, kosher eating is already expensive enough. Another €1,000 would cause additional problems. And these are, but Wilders also in Fikra, when I reviewed it for the Jerusalem Post, was the same story. He could have made an excellent movie without showing the Netherlands covered with mosques, which is not going to happen. They are 5% of the population, 6% of the population, half of them are secular. So these 3% cannot cover the whole country with mosques. Can at best buy a couple of Protestant churches who are empty. But there's no. So if you overdo it, the story of radical Islam and the criminality among Muslims in Europe is so major. You don't have to overdo it. From there to go to Le Pen, you are miles away. I mean, Wilders is not part of, his party is not part of any association of the extreme right-wing parties in the European Parliament. He doesn't associate with them. He has sympathizers under the liberals from where he comes. He sometimes says things which give him a lot of publicity. And I'm not saying that they don't give him votes, because there was, I'll give you just one example, then we return to Nidra. There was a couple of smart Moroccans made a movie, What Would the Netherlands Be Without Moroccans? It was a nice movie saying no mail would ever arrive. In Rotterdam, which has a Muslim mayor, the people who would be honored would never see a mayor arrive because he had left the country. Did a couple of these things. Certain neighborhoods would have to be, slum neighborhoods would have to be taken down because nobody lives there anymore. And so on. It was very smart done. Within an hour, you had 10,000 talkbacks on the website of the people who made that movie. The great majority of those 10,000, it's not small, as I said, he cannot wait for the moment that they leave. I mean, these Wilders' ideas today are, perhaps in a more civilized way, are today supported by, I would say, 30% of the Dutch population. The Le Pen was never anywhere close to that. And we must be very careful, because Odeh Deran did the same story at the Forum of Israeli Anti-Semitic Forum, on this putting Wilders together with Jobbik, the Hungarians, or with the BNP. He's not. I mean, he's a Democrat who sometimes falls says horrible things. But look, if I have to list for you all the things which the left-wing socialists say, the Green Party in the Netherlands say, or the Labour Party, you'll find a similar list.
And may I add?
Sorry, just on my point about Zola, why has no Zola emerged?
But may I add that Le Pen was with Dieudonné. So that's another reason. Le Pen is with Dieudonné. He's not. He's against the Jew. Well, if there's a Zola in France today, where is he going to publish?
He was like Redeker going to be put away.
Yeah.
Redeker.
Yeah, look at Redeker where he is. Look at where he is. And Redeker, he tells me, he has to live in hiding still. I did an interview with Redeker. He's still in hiding 3 years later. And he tells me that he goes to the supermarket, and on the parking lot, a Muslim comes up to him and says, I know who you are, you're Robert Redeker, and we're going to kill you. His whole life is completely ruined.
But Wilders' life is completely ruined.
Yes.
Wilders came here to Israel, not the most risky place in the world for somebody who supports Israel. With 10 security people. When he came the first time to the JSPA and Daphne may remember that, there were 2 security people here who said to me, well, this is really a boring country where nothing ever happens. In the Netherlands, he cannot go out without 6 people.
Everyone then had read you.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand this on a simple level, if I may. One thing we talk about the United States, I think it's unfair with, but the United States really is many, many different countries, or cantons, whatever you want to call it. But there are certain basic concepts, namely in terms of hate, that this is frowned upon and legislated against. I know in New York City, for instance, if you beat me up, you'll be charged with assault. But in the process of beating me up and calling me a dirty Jew, then the penalties are triple, and they'll really go looking for you. And so it is many parts in the States. But what I'd like to understand is a very, very simple question, if I could put it this way. I could walk through the United States in almost every place wearing a kippah. Could I say the same for France? I mean, if I went to France and I walk in the streets there wearing a kippah.
What Jacques Attali said is that nobody told him that you couldn't.
Should I?
Very religious Jews in France do not hide. They wear the kippah. The Haredi in France is less than black. They don't do anything to that. It's sort of intermediary. Some people will take off their kippah in a certain place or cover it with. I wrote it in an article once. I said, what's this baseball team that's all made of Jews, right? It's so obvious. Right? But when people say, sometimes when I'm introduced, somebody will say about God and say you can't wear kippah, that isn't true either. And then the first time the person would go to France, they would say, well, why did she say that? What? Oh, you can't wear kippah, you can wear Magen David, and maybe nothing will happen. But John Finguez almost got killed. And his wasn't even a Magen David, it was a ballistic painting. You might be carrying a book. So, but a young lady was murdered in the United States, in Connecticut, in a college town, when I was there in May, I think it was, by somebody who killed her because she was Jewish. And what I know, you see, living in France, a small country, very centralized, and where the Islamization is very advanced, and in Europe where you have the whole tradition of anti-Semitism, compared to the vast United States with a tremendous regard for freedom. Believe me, when the top changes, the president doesn't have to go from door to door and tell people to change their point of view. Things change all through the country. If they can cancel a hotel in Boca Raton, Florida, because you're going to have killers.
If that came out and was played up, and they could show that this was a hate act or a discrimination act, then the full force of the law would come up
Well,
against it.
we'll see. There's a lawsuit. We'll see what happens. I don't think the full force of the law will come out on that, because they wouldn't have done it in the first place if they thought the law was the same as in our old days.
Ed, please.
I'm curious, and maybe it's a little bit of a continuation of your question, but in a comparative sense, I'm wondering if the last thing you said is interesting for comparing with the United States. In the United States, the country is not centralized. It is almost inconceivably, to use a term that resonates in this building, federalist. And political authority, political legitimacy tends to run from the bottom up rather than from the top down. And I'm wondering if what that may mean is that what you have in America is a process that's very different from in France. If you have a president in France or a presidential rule, the inner circle that is indifferent to anti-Semitism, maybe you're right, it radiates out in the same centralized process that goes back for 500 years in French history. In America, it's much harder, I think, for things to radiate from Washington because people have a certain allergy to Washington, an allergy to New York. There's this dynamic tension always in American culture that in many ways has, back in the day, allowed the South to be a third world country, but today actually works to delay and short circuit and confine these phenomena. I'm tossing this out. I'm wondering if you think
yes, of course, it's much harder. If you read Philip Roth's The Plot to Destroy America, I was having a discussion with academic, left-wing, very refined Jewish American authors in the Midwest during the campaign. And I was explaining to them, this was in France, I was explaining to them my point of view on Barack Hussein Obama because of my experience living in Europe. And this just came out of my mouth. I hadn't thought of it before. And I said, the plot to destroy America, it's not Lindbergh, it's not the right, it comes from the left. And people said Germany is such a cultured country, Germany with this great tradition, it's not possible that they could do these things. Well, we're in the cycle, right? 60-some years. And it's not Germany, and it's not dressed up in those kind of uniforms, and it's happening somewhere else in a different way, and something is happening in the United States. I could talk for another hours. I wouldn't dare to ask you to stay, but of all the things that change in such a short time. Now, why does CARE, the Muslim Brotherhood, have an influence on the little local newspapers all over the United States, so that when the hotel cancels in Boca Raton or Nashville, the local paper writes an article about these terrible terrorists, not terrorists, I mean extremists, who wanted to hold some kind of racist conference, and the hotel canceled, and they take the side of, why? How is that happening in the United States? Why is that young girl? The only mainstream article on her fate was the one I wrote for the Wall Street Journal. No other mainstream media took that. Nobody in any mainstream media thought that it really mattered what's happening to this 17-year-old girl, that she wants to be a Christian in the United States of America. And they send her back to the family. There was an article in the Jerusalem Post the other day about a woman who was Jewish. She converted to Islam, married a Muslim, and she has just converted back to Judaism. And it said in the article, every item, every detail that could in any way identify this woman has been suppressed because she is in danger, because you can be killed. All 4 schools of jurisprudence in Islam are the penalty for apostasy is death. Right? Just straightforward. And in the United States, I can tell you there's kilometers of articles denying that, so that this young lady, who's 17, all she has to do is wait a year and she'll be 18. So she'll be sent back to her family, and then at the mercy of Islam.
May introduce a jarring message. I'm not clear whether your talk is about anti-Semitism in France or Islamification of France, and therefore I understand, and I understand the issue. In other words, everything you've told us is about the negative, terrible impact of Islam and its extremist interpretations in France, whether the murder, whether it's the girl in the USA. So is this about Islam and its impact on anti-Semitism, and there are no other forces impacting anti-Semitism in France? Or is it about other forces? Is it about anti-Semitism in France, of which Islam is a leading force or the leading force?
Well, if it's a jarring question, it's very good because it's going to put this into focus. Because that's exactly why Jacques Attali can say that there's no anti-Semitism in France, and it's just Israeli propaganda, which now I'm automatically making aliyah, right? Because I spread it. Okay. Old-fashioned anti-Semitism exists, and a lot of people, non-Jewish, tell me about it, what they hear at dinner parties and so on. But it alone would not create the situation. The people who did this to Ilan Halimi are influenced solely by Islam. And that is what has to be dealt with. And of course, it's anti-Zionism. So that's why I say they look. I was at Yad Vashem yesterday. That's what they're looking for, right? If we could see that, those kind of people marching down the street, right? Speaking German, saying bad things about Jews. Oh, that's anti-Semitism. We'd say, woo-hoo, that's very bad anti-Semitism, we've got to stop it. But when they see the new version stomping through the streets and saying death to the Jews, did you see the video when the Israeli tennis players played the Davis Cup in Sweden?
Yeah.
And do you see what those people, and they, they were shouting what, that Kaibar, Ya Yahud, Yesh Mohammed, something. It says, Kaibar, remember, Jews, and the army of Muhammad is coming now.
But does the Islamification have other manifestations other than anti-Semitism? Is it an attack on French society?
Absolutely.
That can be, so that the Jews are not alone in trying to deal with Islamification. That's what I'm trying to understand.
I would say that a lot of French people know that, and it's more. This time it's more a two-pronged attack than a step one, step two attack. Okay, and what the example I gave of this, when they shoot at the police, that's nothing to do with Jews. There are some Jewish police there, but that's not why. There are many more Muslim ones. Many French people realize that. However, one, they don't have grassroots movements, and two, the media will never, ever, ever, ever expose them. So how do you know? I mean, you could go door to door and ask people. You can talk to, people do say, imagine the school teacher. Imagine the school teacher go through the whole French educational system, which is a terrible drag, and the baccalaureate, and then the university, and then they get sent to a school where they get chairs thrown at them, sometimes get bashed in the face, threatened with knives.
But French society is, I mean, I don't have a debate, do you agree? But certainly in the past, and I even read in today's paper that Sarkozy, a year or two ago, Sarkozy used the anti-immigrant platform of Islamification as a means of, as part of his political campaign for the presidency and the areas of Paris going up in flames and so on. It seems to be that French society is aware of the dangers of this, and I read that Sarkozy is about to start again because he's one of other issues to raise that issue again. So what I'm trying to make is, in dealing with this problem, it seems to me Jews must in some way try and link it to the wider problems facing French society, rather than just make it, which it is obviously, a Jewish problem, but if it's just us versus the Muslims in France, it's going to be a very difficult issue to tackle.
Well, of course we do, and I'm much more saying us the Muslims than other French, and I'm not French, and I'm writing in English at the moment, and one of the reasons I'm writing in English is more than I publish in French. And but it doesn't. It's just, and as I said, it's hard to tell. What's the latest thing? Is it that they're really going to do something? Or is it another smokescreen to hide the fact that they don't know what to do? When I took the bus from Marble Arch to St. John's Wood on Edgware Road, and I said, what are Europeans going to do? You know, you never had this kind of population transfer. Then, can you imagine, with everything we know about every Muslim country in the world, that the Muslim populations in Europe are magic, would really integrate into the kind of Europe that we think is acceptable? Some good things do happen. Some Muslims who want to be free find it, the freedom and the democracy in Europe, and they try to fight for it. But often they're anti-Zionist. And when I finished my interview with the young ladies in Montpellier who are taking the rescuing the people, I handed my card, and my card is just phone numbers, and I have different cell phone numbers of the countries where I have a cell phone, and Israel. And she looked at it and she said, oh, Israel. Oh, well, would you be able to take me there? I said, well, yeah, would you be able to take me to Algeria? Oh, yes, no problem. And I didn't hear from her again. And I think that that's one of the handicaps, drawbacks, if I would ever try to do any kind of work with these people. But there are a lot of good things happening on an individual basis of Muslims finding freedom in Europe, and that's something we all want to work with them about. But also, it was an anti-immigrant campaign that Sarkozy ran. What he did was say, we have to have a national identity. It's so obvious when people come to a country, and they have to be ready to conform to a country. And if they don't, whose country is it?
That's the central issue.
Yeah, and he presented that's one reason, but he didn't get Le Pen vote. Le Pen got the vote of people who wanted to be able to live in their own country, and nobody else would stand up for it, so they voted for him. As soon as someone decent came along and took that position, then they left Le Pen, and he's collapsed. But we have Besançon coming up. It's coming from the left. It's the Green parties, the ecological Greens in France. They're hooking up with the Muslims because that's who else can they get to vote for them.
So I think what we're asking here is when are we going to get to a tipping point where nobody can, you don't have to watch TV to see it happening on the street in front of you, and somebody's going to say, "God, that's one part." I think. Where do you see that coming from? And my second question is, will anybody bring any kind of economic pressure to bear, because a lot of these immigrants are sustained by welfare payments, and also by lax enforcement of immigration laws?
Yeah, they do the contrary. They think that if they pour on more money, so when they get these these housing projects that are taken over by the drug dealers, it's hard for the decent people. If you have 40% unemployment, it means you have 60% who are working. They're getting their cars burned, they're getting beat up, they're getting their things stolen. They have no decent life at all. And they could be Muslim, they could be black African Christians, or from the West Indies, or French from the way back. And instead, when they get these situations, they pour on money, they say we have to redo the building, we have to fix the elevator, that's good, that was what, you know, and they pour on money, more this, more that, and the media is a constant bleeding heart, a constant, so dishonest, it's disgraceful. I think we have the most disgraceful media in the Western world.
We don't do that.
Yes, I know, I know, but
It's half the media.
I know, but
Norway.
French or worse. And the tipping point. If you have the chance to read The Legacy of Jihad by Andrew Boston,
Yes.
that very much impressed me because I said, how could these bands of thieves and throat slitters take over fantastically developed countries with high level of civilization and destroy all of that in the period of a few hundred years?
Yeah.
So the tipping point might be that they will win.
Christopher Cole says give him half a century.
And he's rather, what's the word? Mild, moderate compared to what I think. I don't think we have that much time. And it's really no gift to anyone. The hope for the Muslim world would be exactly the opposite. If the European countries would, first of all, stand up for themselves, right? Defend themselves, defend their identity, and tell the Muslims who are there, or shape up or ship up. Then those people who really want to live in freedom, they would be creating a new development in Islamic history. But if they're going to give in all the time to the jihad, then those people are in worse danger. They're on the front lines, you know. They set fire to young ladies, they rape them, they do, and you hardly hear them.
A lot of time, not a lot to say. First of all, thanks a lot. I think look, France has a bit sunk down thanks to explosions in other countries. So while France was the only thing on the menu in 2000 and 2001, today has to share the platform with competitors. For a certain time I also saw for a few minutes that you were speaking about Sweden, really.
That's the good news.
About the burning of suburbs, how it is hushed up by the Swedish press. Michael and I discussed this morning that you will never read that the riots, there are for a couple of weeks riots ongoing in Sweden in 10 quarters in various cities, Uppsala, Göteborg, Malmö, of course, the leader in Europe. You will never hear that these are Muslims. Even though everybody knows that they are Muslims, it's only thanks to an extreme right party, which we cannot identify with, which is outside the Swedish parliament, that one knows that all these criminals are Muslims. So, but the real issues, and there are many issues. I think the first important issue, let's start with the Jews. Look, Trigano, will publish it soon, says very simply, in order to survive in a prominent position as a Jew in France, you have to distance yourself from other Jews. That is the key for success if you are identified as a Jew. You have what?
In most of Europe.
Yeah, no, in Italy it is not true.
Sure, England certainly is.
But
In England,
yeah, but you have to distance yourself from Israel, but you have also to distance yourself from the rest of Europe, and then you get figures of which Attali is not even the best known, Esther Bembassa is even perhaps more known for that. You get these figures who really are then embraced by the multicultural part of society because they are not like the Jews. They are Jews, but not like the Jews. So that is a key thing of reading Attali. I'm singularly unimpressed by Attali. He wrote 49 books, of which we know that they have been written largely by others, because once he could not explain how he had plagiarized a sentence in one of his in one of his books because he hadn't written it. Besides that, Mitterrand, who used Attali as a close, really sitting before the front of his door, and looking through the files, said once he has so many ideas, he has 10 ideas, and I always take one. Now, I was a professional consultant. If 90% of your ideas are thrown out, you aren't very good in your profession. So I think Attali is one. At the bank, he was, at the Eastern European Bank, he was an absolute disaster, mainly known for paving his room with marble, while the real work was done by the number two, whom I knew very well because he was an ex-Sono Brothers partner. So the guy is one of these hollow inventions, which, and we have discussed that once, which runs in France, can run quite far.
Yes, yes.
So far for the Jews. Now, you made a very interesting remark, which passed like that, because there is here not a French tradition around the table. You spoke about tribalization. Tribalization, of course, France is a centralized country. There is a republic, everybody is a republican, that means that there is no uglier word in France than communautarisme, belonging to a community other than being religious, but belonging to a community with an ethnic identity other than French. And now suddenly here the Muslims are really overthrowing the most essential, perhaps, element of the French Revolution of 1789. And this is something which, now, that also gives some marginal hope for Jews, because if there is a big Muslim tribe, there is perhaps also space for a small Vietnamese tribe and a small Jewish tribe.
They accept the Muslim tribe because they're afraid of them, and they don't accept the Jewish.
Yeah, but look, ultimately, but I don't see great promise in that. Now, to the main issue, look, let's do a few small ones. Shelters for honor killings. There is a pilot project in the Netherlands, two shelters for honor killings, which wasn't there in my youth, but there were also no Muslims, so we didn't have a state-sponsored shelters for honor killings. They can't cope. 70 people have been turned down, which, I mean, of course, the press will not explicitly say 70 Muslims have been killed down, but honor killing is not a Dutch Protestant habit. Now, to the real, we have really two, three real points left. The question of tipping point. You never know when the tipping point comes. I don't think Kristallnacht was planned a year ahead. Kristallnacht was a tipping point. Something explodes somewhere in Europe, and that may become the tipping point, because there are all kinds of counter forces building up. I think when you said that there is, let's say, Islamization and Leslie's question, the question is that Islam has brought to Europe a kind of extreme racist criminality which wasn't there before in significant ways. With the millions of Muslims who came hundreds of racist criminals of an extreme racism, which wasn't there before. You find that in Norway, you find that in not great numbers in Sweden, you find it in the Netherlands, you find it in France probably, and in Britain, and in Germany. So that really leads to counterforces. Now once you get, as a reaction to Muslim radicalism, you get extreme right-wing vigilantes and all these kind of things, you have, via the Muslims, helped create a second violent anti-Semitic force. Because the left, to a large extent, is criminal in its demonization of the Jews, but it isn't so violent by itself in most places. Yeah, but in most other places, it aren't the left who will beat up a Jew who wears a Magen David in most European countries.
Yeah,
In
no,
France they
the
may,
French,
but
the
look,
left, the extreme left will destroy. You know, they did that at Strasbourg. The extreme left is very violent, and the left goes along with it in many ways, but not against Jews. It's not
no.
politically against Jews, but violently against French.
Look, so you have suddenly the Muslims create a counterforce which is also violent against Jews. So they are both themselves extreme racist, and they are instruments for creating more extreme racist. So, because you see it, there were very few violent incidents before 2000. While there was certain countries an extreme right, but not so extreme. There will be a tipping point somewhere. The question is whether it will be too late for the Jews or not. That's the real question, because the question is how fast will the tipping point come. But it will come somewhere, because Muslims are not people, to the extent that they are a uniform force, who will quietly wait until they take over the country because it disintegrates because of lack of identity, and they multiply because of birth rates. That's not going to happen. And they are raising antipathy in Europe in a great speed. So the national identity this week, one of the government parties, the smallest Christian party in the Netherlands, brought out a report where the author says, what are our values? I am afraid that our society may disintegrate because we have no common values anymore. There is nothing which unites all Dutch. And the guy whom I know, he's the head of the research institute, knows what he's talking about because he lived 7 years in Egypt. So he understands what he's saying, and I think it's very, very important. And you see the phenomena everywhere. You didn't mention, whether you saw it because you didn't were here. Bobak said it's too late to forbid.
The niqab?
It's too late to forbid the niqab. It should have been forbidden long ago.
That's
And
typical
that,
of them. No,
yeah,
I didn't see that.
that is the one man.
He's a moderate.
One man who's the director of the head of the mosque in Paris, the old mosque. He's supported by the Algerians. He is symbolizes modern Islam. So that leaves us then as last point with the press. Look, it is absurd that the European press has never been investigated, because we live on a concept of freedom of press. Freedom of press means freedom of press is a misnomer. Freedom of press means that the government doesn't interfere and react with what you write. Freedom of press means that journalists, who usually, for the extent we know, do not represent at all the voting patterns of the countries they live in, and the few countries where we know it, we can show it, censor themselves and don't let the government censor. And this is, if you want to have the latest phenomenon, it hasn't even been published. Aftonbladet, paper which suddenly became famous for the wrong reasons. The Swedish paper which published the organ story, which one or the other Israeli idiot is now going to invite him to speak in Dimona. Aftonbladet was offered by Camera an article on hundreds of cases of organ theft in Jordan and Egypt. Now, Michael can explain that better, but I am discovering that Scandinavian culture has a particularity. That is, if you ask them nasty questions, they disappear. They will never answer. You can write, Wiesenthal, I never understood it, that it is a pattern. Wiesenthal Center writes a letter to Mr. Stoltenberg about one or the other story. Stoltenberg never replies. They write him a second letter on another scandal. They sent, the Lillang scandal, the diplomat in Riyadh. They sent him a press release from 6 months ago. Now we have a third letter on the boycott in Trondheim, and I wonder whether they reply. But it's my, so after Andrea Levine of Camera, who is not just culturally integrated in Scandinavia, cannot understand why Aftenblad doesn't reply. I said to her, welcome to Scandinavian culture. So you have, the system is very simple. Sweden is perhaps the most extreme case. You have one national press agency. That national press agency distorts the information it gets from AP, Reuters, and so on. And this is by a blog has been justified. So you have the national agency, which is your main source, already distorts incoming information. Then you have the newspapers, and the newspapers will never publish that all these riots, and believe me, they have enough to say grace over, are by Muslims. Now, then you have to, then they will attack Israel. Now you have the trick. 100 times more Muslim countries with probably 1,000 times more criminality than Israel together. So you should really give 1,000 times attention to Israel, to the Arabs, and one to Israel. They sort out Israel and don't sort out the Arabs. Thus, Israel looks criminal. Thus, as over the Palestinian criminality is not mentioned, Muslim criminality in the country is not mentioned, you have created the infrastructure in which Mr. Bildt, the foreign minister, can be anti-Israeli, or for that purpose Mr. Störe in Norway. This is a system which I don't think it exists in France, obviously. Perhaps with one... Huh? Sure. And besides that, there is, I know only one pro-Israeli journalist who are full at
Yes, and you see where he is. He's like in the basement.
Yeah.
In the basement, like a little mouse, he's allowed to sit there.
So you have here a system which creates the infrastructure. Then you of course say, look, there are no European Jewish organizations, whereas the Israeli government, which also falls victim to this, the Israeli government is nowhere, doesn't want to understand it. And if you have a weak ambassador, as Israel had in France for a couple of years, you have also an ambassador who will not really stand up with a foreign office. You may contradict.
You see the book he just wrote?
Yeah.
And then he's at all the media interviews, they love him, they laugh.
Yeah, but I'm speaking about the last
The
one.
present ambassador is a little better. He is a little better.
Anyhow, so you get a situation which is a no-win situation, because the information which goes into the country is already distorted, and all these noble intellectual thoughts of let the best ideas win is not such a great idea if the playing ground is tilted. So
That idea won by cheating.
Huh?
That idea, that the best idea win, is an
By
idea that
cheating.
won by cheating.
So you have a system which can only be broken by explosions. And it will have to explode. It has exploded. The British, not having lived under occupation, have, for them, one big bombing wasn't enough. The Dutch, who are usually extremely pragmatic, started to understand by something which shouldn't really draw an attention: the killing of one Dutchman, by one Dutchman by another private individual, a fanatic Muslim. So why one killing suddenly becomes that's not the tipping point, but a turning point in a country, that depends on individual cultures. In Sweden probably, and in Norway you would have to put much more effort in order to get to a tipping point. So where are the Jews in all this? Well, the Jews fulfill a historical role in Europe, even though it differs from country to country. The Jews are the precursors. They are usually the first ones to undergo certain phenomena, and which will arrive later to society at large. In France was the case, the first people to be beaten up in 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004. Where the Jews in 2005, the October riots broke out. The Jewish cars were not burned were burned at random. It was against French society. The Jews are the precursor to show that the United Nations Human Rights Commission is totally morally corrupt. The Jews are the precursors to show that academia, in particular in the humanities, has major corrupt elements. The Jews are the first ones who show that Amnesty and Human Rights Watch are really morally corrupt organizations. The Jews are the first one to show that Turkey is unfit to join the common market. The Jews are the first ones to show that socialism in many European countries is a totally degenerated phenomenon. That's quite a lot for people who represent a few promille of the European population. And of course turn it around and say, look, let's look at the Jews and we will know what the future of Europe is.
I have a question that maybe follows up on that. As a person who deals in ideas, one of the phenomena in America that is, I have the impression that it's different in Europe, is that you still have the concept that's deeply embedded of a free marketplace of ideas. Americans are very lucky, and namely they may not know how to spell it, but they are it. And if we look in the 80s, 90s, and over the last 30 years, you see this phenomenon where a vacuum is created sort of on the right wing of news and commentary, and in America it's filled. And it's filled, I don't know, there may be people sitting around this table who have different views, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is filled with radio commentary that was taken over by, Republican and right-wing commentators, with the internet, with the Fox News network. And it was definitely, in the 1980s, it was really hard to get, or in the 1970s, hard to get that perspective. And we know that journalists, this is not controversial what I'm saying now, but 85% in America are Democrats and 10% are Republicans or something like that, and 5% independent. So my question is, granted that all of these free marketplace of idea problems exist in Europe, where is or why is there not, or maybe there is, and we just haven't touched on it, that kind of phenomenon? There's a vacuum. Why isn't there something rushing in to fill it? Talk radio, internet, blogging, and whatever.
Let's put it the other way. How can it be that in the United States, it was, as you described, that the president is going after exactly that? Why? It's not fun. He has more ideas of what to do getting rid of Glenn Beck than to get rid of the Taliban. So he knows that's the pinpoint. My sense of history is that we are on the brink of a disaster, and that one of the key elements is that the United States is falling. Because if the United States hadn't fallen, right, at this moment in time, the whole configuration would be very different. And I'm not a fatalist, so I'm fighting to but I have to face it, and I find that when I'm talking to colleagues, as I always say, I'm not a real journalist, and I don't have that background. I come from elsewhere, and I have colleagues who are real journalists, very respectable. But I find that I think sometimes I'm more right than they are about these things because they don't go far enough. They want to talk about what happened in the United States with the election of Obama as if it's a normal thing, just the way the newspaper is writing now there's turf battles in the shopping center in Cathay, as if it's a normal thing. Oh, this turf battle was about that. Oh, the other one was about a girl. Right? Now it's a phenomenon in our society. So Obama is not. No, this is something incredible that happened to the United States. And I don't know to the extent that the Americans can fight back, but I do know that one of the handicaps they have is that they don't even realize that that can happen. And where did I get a lot of opposition to what I was trying to say during the campaign? It's because of my point of view from Europe, and I want to write about what I knew about him. And my editors would say, oh, nice Nidra, that's sweet of you, but you're in Europe and we'll take care of Obama, don't worry, we know about this, right? But they didn't. They didn't know what was happening. It's not an American phenomenon, and they didn't know, and they're still not describing it as it really is.
No, but the difference is in the United States, there's an active, very forceful, very aggressive political right, a philo-Semitic right, non-Jewish philo-Semitic right.
And in
That's
Congress,
combating,
right.
not Obama, but just the broader trends of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. I guess the question is, on the right in France or in other European countries, I mean, is there an emerging political movement that's trying to give its voice via the blogosphere or the media? Is there a standpoint in France? Is there a weekly standard in France?
No, there are blogs. There are blogs, but I know a lot of these people in France and in Europe, and it's so small compared to they're over because it's a very monumental. These European countries are so monumental. I don't underestimate the power of grassroots. I know Congress is still strong, and maybe that's the most beautiful thing that could happen, because if in the United States they push back the force that's just been allowed to creep in, that will also help all the rest of us. But I don't see it in Europe, and I practically cry sometimes, because, in France, I'm not French, but as you can imagine, my roots have been planted there, my generations are there, it matters what happens. How can you ever do anything good in the country if you don't have media where different points of view can be expressed?
Howard, and then we to finish.
Thank you. I share the concerns, deep concerns, vis-a-vis Islamic fundamentalism in the West and even in the United States that my siblings, my cousins, my friends can't understand. Okay. Having said that, an observation and perhaps a question about the U.S. particularly. You mentioned pushback just now. I wonder how strong that pushback really is, and to what extent, as we saw in the last election, the last election, of course, a lot of it was anti-Bush, and we recognize that. But I wonder to what extent it's cyclical, in the sense that we're concerned about this issue around this table and in this country more than anything else. The issue that will bring down Obama will not be these kinds of issues. The issues will be the economy and healthcare. If he's to be brought down, we see the figures coming down, etc. But what would happen, let's say the pushback comes, and on those other issues, he is not reelected, and Newt Gingrich, who is trying to lead the Republican Party back to fantasy again, to be reelected. I hope it's not fantasy. To what extent will we not be concerned about these things any longer? I wonder about that.
You mean you think that if they can get rid of Obama on those issues, those domestic issues,
right,
and they won't be concerned anymore about foreign policy, and they'll just... I can't imagine the candidate who could defeat him who wouldn't still stick with the foreign policy issue, because that's our survival. That's, the domestic issues are in all of our countries.
If the Republican candidate defeats him, it's going to be based, his mandate is going to be, I would predict, more in the economic terms, more in the domestic terms, the healthcare kind of stuff, etc. Yes, he'll have a different foreign affairs, international perspective. There's no question. But to what extent will it really shift back to the extent where Americans will really understand that there is an Islamic fundamentalist push in this world, and they have patience.
Yeah, well, they certainly didn't understand it this time around, right?
Yeah.
And that was the first test. And are they going to get better or worse? I can't emphasize enough this feeling I have that something unprecedented has happened there. Yeah. And that happens.
Once they pull out of Afghanistan and Iraq, they won't, there'll be a different attitude.
Wouldn't have been an economic meltdown. We don't.
I'm very skeptical about I don't have any confidence whatsoever in that field, but I'm just skeptical that the economic problem was as bad as they made it look. They did that to take the attention away from Iraq.
It was pretty bad. It was very bad.
But in any case, he's not fixing it. So not only is he not fixing it, but he had no credentials to fix it.
Okay. central bank has to fix.
I would like to thank you for coming and for the informative presentation. And we will encourage you. The next lecture is going to take place. We don't have, I think, any exact dates as of now, but we'll let you know by email about our next activity. So thank you everyone for coming.